Hey everyone! In this century, we'll be taking a look at the Elite Four, the villainous group of trainers specifically from the iteration we see in Pokemon Adventures Volume 1 to 7. Oftentimes, to the degree that you love something is the same degree that you will hate anything that threatens what you love. For the Elite Four, their love for Pokemon resulted in a similar magnitude of hatred for humanity, resulting in their extremist goal to destroy the world and reshape it as they see fit. Due to humanity's industrial expansion resulting in deforestation and pollution, the Elite Four have witnessed the widespread death and suffering of Pokemon across the region, leading them to one conclusion: that humans and Pokemon are not meant to coexist. From their point of view, the only way for Pokemon to thrive would be to eradicate most of humanity in order to create a Pokemon utopia. And as the region's elite trainers, being a superior cut above that of the gym leaders, the Elite Four are a force to be reckoned with, priding themselves on their undefeated record and being well able to make good on their threats. Now, because we have a group of characters here, I'll start off with a brief profile for each of the four of them before wrapping up with their motives as a whole. Starting off with Lorelei, the Ice-type specialist. A cold, confident, and sophisticated woman, Lorelei is one of the members that is more emotionally driven than some of the rest. Similar to Lance, since young she has seen much of the harrowing effects that humanity has on her beloved Pokemon, oftentimes through the destruction of their natural habitat. She exudes a strong sense of pride and self-assurance, mixed in with a heavy dose of witty sarcasm both in and out of battle. Her fashion sense is indicative of her choice to live on the edge, given that it takes a considerable acceptance of risk to wear elevated heels in rocky caves and when standing on ice. Of the four of them, perhaps she is the most persistent one, hence her role as the group's tracker, being sent to hunt down Yellow. In keeping with her specialization, Lorelei is somewhat cold-blooded, being adept at administering pain during interrogation, with a demonstrated keen sense of observation and being able to tell when one is lying. If you spurn her once, there's no coming back from that, the best example of which is when she only gives Red only one chance to join her. It would be foolish to underestimate her, given the amount of tricks she has up her sleeve, from her makeup accessories down to her voodoo ice dolls, which almost cause grievous hurt to Green if she had not some tricks of her own. But that's not to say that Lorelei only relies on sneaky, underhanded tactics. If push comes to shove, she's also capable of using brute force to hold her own, with one of her signature moves being a devastating ice missile, creatively combined from the attacks of her Cloyster and Dugong. Next we have Bruno, the fighting and ground-type specialist. Bruno is somewhat of an oddity here. Yes, he's part of the Elite Four due to his exceptional abilities as a Pokemon trainer, but he's completely out of their overall mission to create a Pokemon utopia. But that's not to say he doesn't love his Pokemon with just as much intensity as his peers. Bruno has the distinction of being the only member of the Elite Four who doesn't have any homicidal tendencies. As he makes it known expressly himself, he lives for the thrill of battle and was only looking for a worthy opponent, which he finds in Red. Bruno is generally stoic and serious, only displaying emotion in his excitement during the tense moments of a Pokemon battle. Just like his fighting and ground-type Pokemon, Bruno is an embodiment of strength and resilience, a fact made apparent by his chiseled physique and peak conditioning, both of which arise out of his endless hours of training. For him, pushing himself past his limit is not just a hobby, it's his way of life. As with all top-tier athletes, Bruno takes pride in his physical prowess, which he uses to his advantage in Pokemon battles, incorporating his nunchucks as part of his battle style, which primarily exploits his speed. Outside of training, which is not often, Bruno is not one for much conversation, and more of a lone ranger flying solo apart from the rest of the team. but overall he does come across as quite a decent person, and probably a pleasant guy to hang out with if you can keep up with him. Due to his status as an outlier and his lack of involvement in the Elite Four's overall plan, he is eventually subject to mind control to be forcefully used for their purposes against his will. Which brings us to the third member of the group, Agatha, the ghost-type specialist responsible for Bruno's mind control. Agatha is the most unnerving of the group, often creepily lurking in the shadows under the cover of darkness with a mean-looking smirk. Her seniority in age is apparent from her countenance, but made all the more obvious by her old-fashioned dressing and the walking stick she carries. Agatha displays a certain level of cynicism, a common phenomena from the accumulation of negative experiences in her life. However, she still had somewhat of a maternal side to her, showcased in the moment when she comforts a crestfallen Lorelei when her seal became sick due to water pollution. As for her involvement in the Elite Four, Agatha is somewhat in the same vein as Bruno, in the sense that she's also not as emotionally invested in their mission as Lorelei and Lance are. Unlike the two of them, it's suggestible that the environmental concerns don't affect her as much, given that her ghost-type Pokemon actually thrive in poisonous and polluted conditions. When it comes down to it, Agatha is driven by petty revenge, primarily against Professor Oak for abandoning her and the research group to start his Pokédex, and for subsequently defeating her in a Pokemon battle. She gets her chance to vent this resentment vicariously when the Elite Four crosses paths with the group of protagonists, one of which is Blue, who happens to be Oak's grandson. Given that Blue is also a custodian of the Pokédex, attacking him is double the affront to Professor Oak, given their blood relation and for the fact that Blue is working to complete his grandfather's dream of a Pokemon encyclopedia. Agatha's ghastly nature is seen in her choice of style and battle, with her bag of tricks containing debilitating tactics such as hypnosis, temporary blindness, and paralysis. And if her specialty in ghost Pokemon wasn't enough of a clue, there is also somewhat of a morbid undertone that we see with her, most notably by the intangible coffin she places her opponents in while she cackles creepily in maniacal laughter in the background. Lastly, and certainly not the least, we have Lance, the dragon-type specialist and the leader of the group. Lance is without a doubt the most powerful of the Elite Four, and also the most destructive, highlighted in the moment when he launches a full-force hyper beam into Vermilion City, which could have potentially caused a staggering number of casualties if it wasn't unoccupied. Clearly, this is a man who is unrelenting in the attainment of his goal, and would not hesitate to step into the morally questionable zone. Personality-wise, Lance is aloof and reserved, and a man of few words. He does seem to have some affinity for theatrics, as reflected by his decision to wear a cape, which he eventually ditches later. Given the amount of time he spends up in the air on his dragon Pokemon, we can easily see how this would embellish his appearance. A central trait of Lance is his obsession with power and his corresponding pride over it, coming across as somewhat power-drunk. But it is a power that is well-deserved, given the amount of patience required to train dragon Pokemon past their weaker stages. With them reaching their final stages of evolution, Lance now commandeers what he labels as unbeatable dragon strength, with abilities like controlling the weather within his grasp. Strategically, Lance has divided his Pokemon attacks into 4 incremental stages, with each increasing in intensity, and prides himself over the fact that he seldom has to go beyond the first 2 when battling his opponents. Not even Blaine with his Mewtwo could defeat him. Perhaps it's somewhat poetic that at the end he was humbled by the lowly Beedrill, a Pokemon he likely would have scoffed at given his reaction to Yellow's team. It's likely that Lance's obsession with power is a compensation for the helplessness he felt as a child. Similar to Lorelei, in his formative years he witnessed the suffering of his beloved Pokemon from humans destroying their environment. But unlike Lorelei, who at least had her Pokemon healed, Lance is a lot more jaded given that his Pokemon died with no recourse. This experience with loss turned his heart bitter and cold, and longing for the day when he can exact his revenge on their behalf. But there is one more element that contributes to his strong emotional attachment to his Pokemon, namely his ability to read their minds. By being able to understand their thoughts, Lance is much more attuned to their emotions, especially their pain and their suffering, thus making him more driven to ensure their protection. Collectively, the Elite Four would execute the fullness of their scheme, beginning with an invasive army of Pokemon into the different cities of the region to commence their totalitarian rule by force. Of course, at the end of the day, their methods are extreme and frowned upon, but not without some level of merit. In this world, Pokemon are far more than just pets. They are companions who can understand you, not just in speech, but also in emotion, being able to empathize with you as you go through life's journey together. On a further plus point, they also tend to be free of the evil of selfish ambition commonly found in humans. Therefore, it's no exaggeration to suggest that the bond between a Pokemon and its trainer could easily rival that of some of the closest human-to-human relationships. And for the Elite Four, what makes their attachment to Pokemon even stronger is the fact that all of them appear to be loners with little human relations, if any. We can only speculate as to how they became so insular, choosing to isolate themselves on a private island. But chances are they've all seen enough of humanity to throw their hands up in defeat and conclude that the companionship of Pokemon is sweeter than the fellowship of their own kind. In light of humanity's industrial expansion, it's likely that if the destruction were to go unchecked, the inevitable result would be the gradual extinction of some species of Pokemon. Not to mention that we also have criminal organizations like Team Rocket spreading even more misery by abusing Pokemon in their lust for power. Over time, the Elite Four have seen enough and have reached the limit of their patience. But while we can easily criticize their actions, their motives are somewhat softened by their overall intention. None of the protagonists would object to the notion of saving the creatures that they are so endeared to. And while humans are indeed guilty of being irresponsible and reckless, as the old adage goes, two wrongs don't make a right. Even if the Elite Four don't have any regard for their fellow humans, their actions would still cause much harm to Pokemon as well. These humans who are being targeted for elimination will likely have Pokemon who care about them, and who would likely fight to the death to protect their owners. In the course of his revenge, Lance himself neglects the care of his own Pokemon, causing them to push past the point of exhaustion. And in their state of their hatred towards humanity, the Elite Four have lost sight of one key fact, that humans are capable of change for the better, such as Blaine, who abandoned his cruel experimentation on Pokemon. Even those who are neck-deep in evil are capable of repentance, which we see even with someone like Giovanni, who had a change of heart after seeing a young version of himself in red. The threat to Pokemon's extinction still needs to be addressed, but perhaps in a more tactful and targeted manner. As is dictated by the Pareto principle, it's likely that only a few key individuals need to be educated on the consequences of their actions, such as the owners of the factories and the power plants. If you think about it, the Elite Four's approach is somewhat similar to that of Ross from Batman Begins, throwing out the baby with the bathwater and condemning the vast majority who are innocent with the few who are guilty. Instead of wiping out most of humanity, the Elite Four might have instead opted to put these key players in check to ensure more environmentally responsible expansion, and perhaps creating nature reserves to provide the displaced Pokemon another suitable habitat to thrive in. And given how much the general population seemed to value the lives of Pokemon, it would be very doable to garner the support of the public as well. If these key individuals didn't listen or care before, then yes, some display of force might be necessary. It's likely that a stern ultimatum from the region's most powerful trainers and the public's disapproval would eventually compel them to comply with these requests. Fortunately, at the end, the Elite Four were stopped by our group of protagonists, and they eventually learned the error of their ways. But not before serving as a reminder that love and hatred are often flip sides of the same coin, and can easily lead to drastic actions in the event of a lapse of judgment.